Last night I saw upon the stair a little man who wasn't there.
My grandma's house has always, for as long as I can remember, been a scary place. My dad and aunt and uncle all grew up in the house and had paranormal experiences occur throughout their lives. One example was when my dad and uncle were teenagers. My uncle was walking down the steps and was swinging a towel as he had just washed his hair. Out of nowhere, my dad, who was standing in the living room at the bottom of the stairs, saw the towel straighten out in front of my uncle as if someone pulled it, and my uncle fell forcefully down the stairs. Now, my grandma hates all things paranormal, especially Ouija boards, and she would often visit gypsies. So it is a big no-no in our family to discuss the paranormal events that occur in her house. 20 years or so ago, my cousins and brothers were playing in the upstairs bedrooms of my grandparents' house. The toys were set up in the room across the hall from them, and they were all in the same bedroom, playing a board game. Out of nowhere, a Hot Wheels car, no batteries, no wind-up, just an average Hot Wheels car, slowly exited the room that the toys were in, went across the hall and into the room where they were all sitting. Needless to say, they were all terrified. Around 8 years ago, my oldest brother moved into the basement of their house. One night when he was home alone, he woke up out of a deep sleep, having felt like he was shaken by someone. He stood up and instantly smelt gas. He went upstairs and outside of the house. Later, he found out there was a carbon monoxide leak, and if he had not woken up, there's a big chance he could have died in his sleep. Months after that, when my grandparents were away for the weekend, the family decided to try the Ghost Radar app in their house. We all sat around the phone and my uncle asked the normal questions. Is anyone here? Blah blah. He then asked, who used to live in the basement? At this point my brother had moved out. The Ghost Radar replied with my brother's full first name, which no one ever calls him. We were shocked. So my uncle asked, how did you save my brother? It replied with, wake. He then asked, what did you save him from? And it said, gas. Needless to say, we were all shocked. The last thing that happened in the house that I'm going to talk about is my grandparents' friend's obituary. My grandparents' friend's obituary will show up in their kitchen every month or so. This friend had passed away probably 15 years ago. They usually say hello to their friend and put the obituary back in the basement, where it is supposed to stay. A little while later, it will show back up in the kitchen.
I am 25 years old now, and I still remember this event pretty distinctly. At the time of when this event occurred, I was living in Aurora, Ohio near Cleveland. I had one younger brother who was not present for whatever reason. The time of which this event occurred was probably either after school or during the middle of the day on a weekend. I don't really remember. I do, however, remember that it was in broad daylight. My brother and I shared a room with a bunk bed in which the bottom bunk was perpendicular to the top bunk, allowing for sort of a cubby of space underneath the top bunk. There was a small area of space, I'd say probably about 1 foot in width, between the back of the lower bed and the wall that it was near. My friend from class and I were sitting at the foot of the lower bed at the opposite end, away from the underneath portion of the bunk bed near the wall. We were playing with Pokemon cards. This was in like 2001 or 2002, so Pokemon was all the rage at this point for young kids. This was around the time period that Game Boy Advance were released. Everything was normal, and we were having a conversation as we were messing around with the cards. Then all of a sudden, something at the back of the bed caught the corner of my eye, and naturally I turned to look and see what it was. As I looked to my left, the seemingly normal conversation that I was having with my friend abruptly and ominously came to a halt, and both of us stared in bewilderment and in complete silence for I'd say a good 3 seconds. It was very quick. When I turned, I saw a green hand which had come up from the backspace behind the bed and was feeling the pillow and the bed in the area where my brother would put his head to sleep. Like I said, the whole thing lasted I'd say about 3 seconds, and then the hand vanished. I don't remember if it went back behind the bed or if it just dissipated. It happened very quickly. As soon as the hand disappeared, I broke the ominous silence and asked my friend sitting next to me, "Did you see that?" He replied, The hand?" confirming that we both saw the same phenomenon. I ran across the house and told my mother what we had just saw, and she quickly brushed it off and told me it was nothing. I went back to the same room and continued playing with my friend. I wouldn't say that my friend and I were particularly scared by the event, though it was definitely very strange. I never told my little brother about it, who slept in the lower bunk bed. And to this day, I remember this event distinctly, and I've looked online and found other events that were similar to this event described on the internet. Other people claiming to have seen green hands in their house. Has anyone else heard of this before?
My wife and I are expats from the US, and about 2 weeks ago, we had to go to the nearest big city to renew her passport. This was right before the government announced new leeway on these things due to coronavirus, so bad timing on our part. But that's neither here nor there. This city is a couple of hours away via a highway that cuts through the mountains, but the tolls to use said highway come to something like $40 one way, so we like to use the free mountain road instead. This road is widely known as the most dangerous road on the island, since visibility can go pretty quickly if clouds roll in, and the road itself is narrow, with many twists and turns. So we do our afternoon appointment and start heading back. The sun went down as we were heading through the mountains, but the weather was fine and visibility was great. We were chilling out, talking about whatever, listening to music, etc. We drove around one of those sharp winding turns, and that's when we saw the car. It was turned over in a ditch on the side of the road, completely totaled. Before we could say or do anything, I noticed something on the other side of the road closest to us. A group of people, maybe 8 or 9 of them, all standing perfectly still along the road. They were totally fine, completely uninjured, just staring across the road, not acknowledging anything. Thinking back on it, there's no way all those people could have fit in that car, not even close. I didn't stop. I don't know why. I still don't know why. Right now, I can't imagine not stopping in a situation like that. My wife too has stopped in situations like that before. Neither of us said a word. We didn't speak for at least another 10 minutes when we finally acknowledged it. It was weird though. When we finally acknowledged it, it was just stuff like, "They seemed fine, eh? Yeah, they didn't try to flag us down, so they must already have help on the way," etc. I was too messed up to understand at the time, but thinking back, we were both 100% spooked. My wife is one thing, but I just don't get spooked. I can't remember the last time I've felt unnerved by something. But that scene had me scared silent for 10 minutes, and then pretending to be fine immediately after. A couple days later, I started thinking about it again, and I started feeling guilty. Those people probably needed help, and I drove right by. I talked about it with my wife, but she avoided the topic like the plague. The area we live in is pretty small, not a lot happens. When there are accidents like this in the mountains, it's reported on very heavily. So I started looking into it to see what happened. I couldn't find anything for the life of me. Not a single word about any serious accidents that had happened recently within 100 miles. Again, I brought that up with my wife, but she desperately doesn't want to talk about it. I still get a chill when I think of them, standing along the road.
Let me just start off with an apology for the way that this is typed. I'm terrible at typing to make things read smoothly. At Dad's house, it was me, Mom, Taylor, and Dad, until they became separated prior to a divorce. At Mom's house, it's me, Taylor, Trip, and Mom. I'll indicate whose house is whose while writing each story. Okay. When I was really young, I grew up in a house that my grandparents built. It's unknown if there's been any death there, but as Dad remembered, that a great uncle died in the upstairs office, while relatives remember that the uncle passed in a nursing home. Anyway, when I was about 6, I would sneak downstairs to grab a midnight snack. I'd come downstairs, turn on the bathroom light, close the door but not latch it, walk into the kitchen, grab something, walk back to the bathroom, turn off the light, open the door, flush the toilet, and sneak back upstairs. The final night of this routine, I followed all of the steps. I creep into the kitchen when I see something out of the corner of my eye. I stop and stare for about a minute, and I see it again. It's as if someone is walking around the house with a flashlight, turning it on for a few moments and off for a minute. I run upstairs after following the routine and hide in bed. I know for a fact that this is not some weirdo going around our house, as that night it was a full-on thunderstorm with heavy downpour, and our closest neighbor was half a mile down the road. This was also around midnight. Taylor, while living there, has said that he had seen an old man standing in his doorway watching him. After Mom had separated from Dad and prior to me moving to Mom's house, I noticed one night that there was a glowing green shape on my ceiling, like someone had stabbed a knife through the ceiling and an inch made it through the ceiling into my room. At first I was scared, but it would stay there each night. During the day, I'd investigate the area and come up with nothing. I'd sometimes ask for alone time, so I asked if it could leave. 20 minutes after asking it, it would be gone. At one point in time, it had disappeared for an extended amount of time, so I asked for it to come back. After a couple of days, it was back. It would sit on the ceiling for about 6 months prior to the day that I left the house. I'd lived in my mom's house every other week per custody order. My first experience was at 1 a.m. when I was supposed to be asleep. I saw and heard my shoe rattle on the metal shoe rack, but it never happened again. Taylor has said that he has seen a girl in a white nightgown walk upstairs and through my door. He at first thought it was me, until she would walk through my closed door. One night, I had 2 friends over at my house, and Taylor was at his friend's place, so it was just me, Roxy, Trinity, Trip, and Mom. To preface, Mom was recovering from getting a large metal plate in her leg after breaking it, so she was unable to climb the stairs. Being dumb teens, we decided to hold a seance. We crawled inside the cubbyhole at the top of the stairs and started the ceremony. We talked to 3 spirits before we had to suddenly stop and end it, as Roxy was almost crying. We exit the cubbyhole and she has 3 claw marks running down her back. Then we head into Taylor's room to watch YouTube. All 3 of us hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and we think it's Trip. Until he comes upstairs to ask us something and heads back downstairs. There were only footsteps coming up prior to Trip, but never going back down. We settle back to YouTube, and the next thing we hear is deep breathing from the doorway. We book it downstairs and didn't go back upstairs that night. We did, however, head to the park. While there, I saw a black cat and I followed it. There's a creek next to the park that has a ton of brush next to it. I was about 6 feet behind the cat when it disappeared into the brush without a single sound of leaves or rustling weeds. We regroup at the swing set when Trinity points to a house and we look. A woman is floating around the vehicle. Floating, not touching the ground at all. We noped it out of there and head back inside. The next day, Trinity confides that while we were downstairs, she saw a bald man's head walking the outside of the house, poking through the windows with a creepy smile. And then, nothing happened for a while after. Other occurrences in Mom's house is that while video chatting with Roxy, she stops mid-sentence and asks how much room is between the bed and the wall. There was about an inch of space, but she then tells me that she saw a hand reaching over the headboard, which quickly retreated as soon as she asked about the space. A little later, while still talking, and she asked if I had any devices with red LEDs, to which I replied that I don't. She screenshot a picture of the video chat, which showed 2 red eyes right next to me. When she mentioned them, my unplugged CD player promptly opened and I fled from the room. Taylor was watching YouTube with Roxy one night when they switched to watching famous songs reversed. While doing so, Taylor had the overwhelming feeling that she was being watched. They switched back to watching Vines and the feeling went away. We still end up feeling watched every so often, but nothing more so far. And I'd have to ask Roxy if she still has the photo from that one night.
This took place at some time in the early 2000s at an elementary school on Long Island. My dad worked, and still currently works there as a custodian, and being that my parents split up, I would go to work with him on the days he had me in the summer, which was a lot since I loved spending time with him any chance I could. Honestly, I really loved having the whole school to myself. My 2 older brothers would come every once in a blue moon, but naturally they grew out of spending too much of their summer at the school and stopped coming altogether, leaving just me. That's when things started getting strange. There were only 3 of us in the building that whole summer. Me, my dad, and his co-worker, Joey. It's a decent-sized 2-story building with a gymnasium, auditorium, and the other usual elementary school amenities. I would entertain myself the way any kid might during the day, going into the gym and dumping every ball on the floor from the closet, playing on the computers, reading in the library, and making a mess in the art room. Not to mention the best part of it, unlimited tiny cartons of chocolate milk. I suppose it started subtly, from what I recall. Like being in the middle of shooting hoops in the gym, and then all of a sudden just feeling like someone was watching me. So much so that I just dropped the ball and left to find my dad. It happened in the computer room too. I was just minding my own business and then just got this very intense feeling of being watched. It would feel heavy in the room when it would happen, and like the silence became loud, if that makes sense. It creeps me out just remembering that feeling. It started to happen very often, and when it did, I would simply get up from whatever I was doing and leave to find my dad or his co-worker. One day, I had been sitting in the same computer room when it happened again. I decided to tough it out this time and stayed put in my seat, probably playing Oregon Trail or something. I felt that intense feeling make me want to leave, but I stayed, and the longer I stayed, the closer it felt. Like if I turned around, it would be right there behind me. I remember being so tense that my back hurt, and then I heard whispers. They were inaudible, but unmistakably coming from the room I was in. I felt frozen with fear. I remember the voice of the whispers sounding guttural and chaotic. I don't remember how long I sat in fear just listening to something that felt so strange and unexplainable. I snapped out of it when I heard the sounds of women chattering in the hall. I was relieved that there were teachers up there with me and got up without looking back and darted towards the voices in the hall. I was on the top floor of the building. It's shaped like a rectangle, lined with classrooms on the outside, and the center occupied by bathrooms, closets, and a faculty room. The voices I heard were coming from the other side of the building, and when I rounded the corner to get to where they were coming from, there was no one there. I heard the voices again, but now they were coming from the other side of the building, where I had just been. So I went back and again, they were coming from the other side of the building. All the while I was searching for people who weren't there. I had that feeling when you're running up basement stairs and feel like something is right behind you, like ice is running down your spine. I finally decided to run down to the first floor and find my dad. When I did, I frantically told him about the teacher's voices upstairs, but not the whispers. I think I was trying to pretend like that didn't happen because it was so scary. It was the first time I had told him about anything I had experienced because I was so sure there were women talking in the hall upstairs. He explained that there were no teachers here and that they usually came at the end of the summer to set up their classrooms, but it was a bit too early in the summer for that. He also said that he would have had to buzz them in from the main entrance for them to come in the school. Him and Joey checked every room for me to see if there was something there or if there was an open window letting in noise from outside. There was nothing and no open windows, just the three of us in an empty school. We didn't really talk about it after that. He didn't tell me I was hearing things, and he didn't try to explain it away either. It just was what it was, and although that had been a terrifying experience, I had been coming to that school since I was a baby, and it was easy for me to feel comfortable being alone again, even if it did take a couple of weeks of being glued to my dad's side. The last encounter I had in the school was when I was upstairs, alone again, 2 classrooms from the room I heard the whispers in. It was nearing the end of the summer, and I was given the task of dusting off chairs and desks in all the upstairs classrooms from whatever had built up over the summer. Bent over and dusting a chair, I saw in my peripheral vision someone standing in the doorway. I thought it was Joey because my dad is a bigger guy, and this shape looked tall and slender. He was standing there for a while, so I started talking to what I thought was him, but he just stood there not answering me. When I went to look up, I saw a man, but this was not Joey. It happened so fast because he turned and sprinted out of the room almost the moment I looked up, but not quickly enough so that I couldn't see his face. I really wish I hadn't, because it is so ingrained in my memory. It was pale, and it had a human male face, but it looked off. The eyes were too big, and everything about it looked unnatural. It was wearing clothes, but I can't for the life of me describe them, as I was too startled by its face. I froze again, just stood there, afraid to move until finally my body untensed, and I ran back downstairs and into the kitchen. I would usually pretend to feel unaffected by spooky things in the school, but this time, I ran until I found my dad and Joe in the kitchen. Just for the sake of not sounding ridiculous, I asked if either of them had just been upstairs. They hadn't. After I told my dad, they did the whole school check again, reassuring me that no one was there. I remember feeling embarrassed that I had kept coming to them scared. On the ride home that day, my dad had told me that I wasn't crazy and that there was residue in the school since it was old and always full of people. And when it was empty, it was still so used to moving all the time and having all that energy. He said in his time there, he had heard his name being called and mop buckets rolling down the halls when no one was there but him. He said he hadn't told me the first time because he didn't want to scare me. It has been years now since all of that happened, but about 2 years ago from present day, my dad calls me up one night and says, "You'll never believe what one of the teachers told me." He then explained that a teacher claimed to see a well-dressed man standing in the back of another teacher's classroom in the middle of a lesson while walking down the hall one day. When she asked the other teacher who the man was, the other teacher was confused and said there had been no man in her class. It was the same classroom I had seen the man with the big eyes. I don't know if it was the same man that I saw, and I wouldn't tell my dad this since he is frequently there alone to check the building, but I don't know if I believe that the activity there is simply residue or energy. I think there is something there that went out of its way to scare a child, and I don't think it was friendly. Hello watchers and listeners. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Miss Creepy Tales for joining me again on this one. We also did a collaboration on her channel. If you haven't seen that, I suggest you go check it out. A big thank you to all the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. And as always, thank you all so much for your continued support. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.